Today's webinar is titled Demystifying the Cloud, a journey into understanding cloud technology and capabilities in our personal and business lives. And our presenter today is alumnus Craig Branditas. Craig is presently Sales Engineering Manager with CenturyLink, a worldwide communications company that provides communications and data services to residential, business, governmental, and wholesale customers. In his role, Craig is responsible for managing a team of sales engineers for the state of Ohio, supporting strategic and enterprise customers on products and services across the CenturyLink portfolio, including network services, hosting services, professional services, communication services, both voice and data, and network builds, customer equipment needs, and voice-over IP solutions. Craig has also held positions with CenturyLink, Qwest Communications, MCI, and IBM. We are fortunate to have Craig with us for today's webinar. Welcome, Craig, and let's get started.
So we're going to start out by talking about defining what the cloud is, and then talk about who those cloud users are and the risks and benefits in cloud technologies. So the first step is really defining what the cloud is. A lot of times in terms of the cloud, a lot of people say, well, the internet is the cloud. Isn't that the cloud? So the cloud a lot of times is referred to in communications, the internet being one of those clouds. But today specifically what we're going to talk about is cloud computing. And cloud computing has had quite an impact on our lives recently. And the first thing that I really want to talk about is the cloud as a physical place. You know, the servers that we connect to in the cloud are physical place, it's a physical destination that this equipment is located. The cloud, and I like the definition below that has the cloud or cloud computing conveys the use of information technology services and resources that are provided on a service basis. So that's one of the differences that has occurred here over the course of the last couple of years, is that typically companies would buy computers, they would buy those assets, put them in their businesses, and run those computers and the applications on them. But today we're looking more on a lease basis, and companies typically just really buy the time that they need on the resources that they need. And one of the things that's really enabled this capability is the use of virtualization and the ability to have multiple different computers or computer services running on a single computer. So that's been really the forefront of this. So in short, the cloud is a compute environment. And there's both connectivity and capacity limitations. And we'll talk a little later about how you can avoid that, avoid some of those limitations. But as in any compute environment, there are both connectivity and compute limitations that you should be aware of. The next slide here starts to talk about who the cloud users are. And you can see from the slide here that cloud users are everywhere. You have everything from infants to the elderly, consumers of all ages, shapes and sizes, and ethnic backgrounds. And you know, cloud computing is also hit the workplace. And there's some very agile canines that are even logging in nowadays as well. One of the questions that naturally comes up when you have an emergence of a technology like this is why does the cloud exist? And the cloud exists today because it provides cost-effective services for both businesses and consumers. That's what's driving cloud use and cloud technologies in our environment today. Some key examples of cloud use, both on the business and the consumer front, are storage. You see lots of examples. Storage is growing in leaps and bounds in today's environment. Everything from pictures, storage of pictures on your iPhone or videos, to the storage of what's called big data in business environments. So you see large growth in storage, and the cloud is a natural location to put that storage and take care of those storage needs. But then you have applications from a consumer perspective. Look at how we're buying music today. We're getting music from our phones. We're getting video from Amazon or from Netflix, or a variety of different sources that are different than what they used to be. And this drives cloud technology and cloud uses as well. Financial applications, weather, police, fire, security, and how many of us have not used a GPS on our smartphones. So these are all great examples of how we as consumers are using the cloud. On the business side, there's a lot of different line of business type applications. You see companies that specifically target expense management or human resources or ERP type applications. A great example that we see in the workforce today is Salesforce, a CRM application that's really a cloud service. And as companies deploy new uses of their software, many times they're testing these new software applications on a cloud technology. It's much easier for them to do this because then they don't have to buy that entire environment. They can simply rent the CPU, the memory, and the storage that they need for a specific period of time while they test the applications that they're going to deploy, and then roll those out into production applications. And they never have to, invest in the capital to make this happen. One of the questions that comes up many times is, how is the cloud structured? And just like a building is structured in a specific way, the cloud is also structured in a specific manner. There is both physical location or locations that your cloud service provider will be located. And then a business or consumer is going to be buying basically servers, storage, connectivity, and a variety of different managed services. Here are some of the organizations that have cloud services today. And just a few examples here. Many of you who have smartphones or iPhones, iTunes and iCloud are specific cloud applications. Dropbox is one that is seen many times in the business environment for storage. And several of the major hardware providers, including HP, Cisco, IBM, and Dell, have cloud environments. With all the capabilities that the cloud provides us today, the question that is naturally asked then is, are there concerns that businesses or consumers should be aware of regarding cloud services? And one of the concerns, and this is something that you obviously establish with the provider, is a noisy neighbor syndrome. I talked about VMware, which has enabled kind of this cloud emergence. And if you have multiple different applications that are running on a single server, sometimes those applications can impact the performance and the capabilities on that service. A lot of times that can be reduced, but it can have it can have a realistic impact. One of the other things is with data, and where does my data reside? With cloud technologies, your data can really reside anywhere. So it's up to us as both consumers and businesses to really establish some guidelines and rules with the partners that we work with to understand and put some guidelines in place in terms of where my data will reside. Certain types of data may not be able to reside outside of the United States. And if that is a requirement of your data, you need to work with the provider to ensure that your data will reside in a location that meets the rules and requirements that are established by your corporation and by the governmental restrictions that may surround that data. One of the other things that I had alluded to earlier is performance and latency. So latency is the performance of your application. There's a lot of different factors that can impact performance of an application. And consumers are really not as tolerant as they used to be on latency. So having some guidelines that you can refer back to on your specific applications in terms of latency is a very, very good practice to ensure that your end users are getting the kind of performance that they're expecting. In the public web today, security is in the forefront of many people's mind. One of the concerns that many businesses have in going to a cloud or a public cloud service is security. So you want to establish some security guidelines with that provider to ensure that they are meeting your specific requirements. And this goes along with our own personal information as well. So a lot of times, we're all signing off on terms and agreements to websites, but knowing the security around those sites is an important thing to take into consideration for these services. So business recovery is also another topic that is worthy of mentioning at this point in time as well. So many times businesses have the perception that if your data is in the cloud, then it's all backed up and it's all protected and it's all recoverable. And that may or may not be true. But as owners of that information, it's our responsibility to ensure the recovery of the information that we put out there. And that recovery can take a couple of different forms, whether it's some kind of a natural disaster like a tornado, a flood, or I'm going to say somewhat, or an electrical storm, or something that is just more of a normal or a type of event that might occur, like a fire. So it's the data owners and the businesses' responsibility to ensure the business continuity and the business life cycle of the application and the data that application resides or interfaces with. So it's important for both consumers and businesses to take the appropriate business recovery steps for the information that they're utilizing the cloud for. Scalability is a great advantage of the cloud. In the past, especially if you look at for example, the retail sector, where the fourth quarter is got tremendous business volumes, sometimes 3, 4, 5, or many times the normal business volume that a website handles. That the fourth quarter will just, blow the doors off that kind of utilization. So in the past, a business had to have compute power that was many times greater than their normal needs, and this was extremely costly for a business as well. So what they would have to do is they would have to procure, the appropriate hardware, software, in order to meet those needs. In a cloud environment today, there is the ability to scale at a much more rapid pace. So a business that utilizes cloud services can have something referred to in the industry as auto-scaling, where what happens is when a computer or a server reaches certain thresholds, that environment automatically starts up another server in order to meet the demands of the website or of the database or whatever environment it happens to be, really pressing the capacity of that machine. Another example of this on the consumer front is something you and I all use today as our mobile phones. You think of an upgrade to an OS or an operating system on your smartphone. When a provider releases that, you can imagine the massive impact that has with millions and millions of people's cell phones, where all of a sudden now all these people are trying to reach those servers in order to download the latest upgrade or download the latest song, or if you happen to have a website, if something goes viral on your website, the ability to scale in a cloud environment is something that is really, I'm going to say, pretty much required in today's business environment, just because of the virtue of how our lives are changing today. Chances are if you're hitting a website for something because of a specific event, whether it's a tragic event such as happened recently in the South, or a great event like the Cavs winning, your website is going to have, on a normal course of business, specific events where scalability is going to become a critical element to meeting business demands. So what are some of the benefits of the cloud? And I go back to the statement that we made earlier, and that is the cloud provides cost-effective services that makes our lives easier. Here's a couple of examples of applications today that people use as opposed to sending out a regular invitation. People send out an Evite invitation as opposed to maybe going to the store and picking out a card. People can subscribe to Felt and send out a card electronically to people. So these kinds of applications are in our lives today, and they have made a great impact. They've made our lives much easier. And they provide us capabilities that would be difficult for a business or a consumer to try to achieve on their own. It would be costly. It would it would take a lot of time, and so the ability for us to be able to grab applications like this that are out there today just is a great benefit. So starting to wrap things up here, this is I think the last slide that I have, so if you do have questions, I apologize again for the delay that we had in starting, but feel free to ask them online. But one of the things that comes up naturally is the cloud a fading trend? There are a lot of trends in technology, and they tend to come and go very quickly. And one may ask, okay, is the cloud just a fading trend? And I think the best way to answer that is to look at why it's become a trend in the first place. The reason it's become a trend is because it fulfills business needs and consumer needs. It allows us to be able to get things done faster and in a less expensive manner than we were able to in the past. The cloud has enabled this type of huge surge in online activity. And so it's made the consumer's life easier because of the fact that when you're having huge spikes in usage, it's enabled the consumer to not feel the impact of those huge spikes in usage and still provide a somewhat level performance to the consumer, despite the fact that many, many thousands of more transactions are hitting a company's websites. And the cloud has been able to do this without making it exceedingly, I'm going to say, expensive for businesses to put in an infrastructure that would support these huge spikes, because now businesses can basically rent the space and the power that they need on an as-needed basis, as opposed to having to buy, vast amounts of compute power for their specific applications and for a specific need that may just be a short period of time. So that is, I think that's the last slide. Yes, that is the last slide in my presentation. So Cindy, I'll pass it back over to you unless there's other questions.
Hi, Craig. Yep, we do have a couple of questions. Kim wants to know, what about the personal cloud devices such as the one that Western Digital offers?
So I'm not familiar with that. So if she could give a little bit more information on that, that would be great.
Okay, well, we'll have to wait for her to potentially type that in. So while we're waiting, how about a question from Paul? I just retired from healthcare and was part of a Medicaid management in New York State that was attempting to utilize the cloud across providers. As far as I know, they are still struggling. I believe that Rochester Regional Health was also struggling to integrate with Unity Health Systems IT with RGH. Can you comment on something like that?
So there are certain providers that do have clouds that are HIPAA compliant, but a lot of times your application may traverse several different environments. So what the struggle could be there, a couple of different things, but we know that there are clouds, number one, that are HIPAA compliant, and then there's also the ability for businesses to develop what's called private cloud, so or hybrid cloud environments as well. So a private cloud is going to be a cloud that is specific for a specific business, and the cost model is not as attractive for a private cloud traditionally as it is for a public cloud. But then there's also the opportunity for something that's called a hybrid cloud, which is, as you can imagine, just like a hybrid car is gas and electric, a hybrid cloud provides both private and public capabilities. So this allows a business to, I'm going to say, portion off certain portions of their applications that may be private in nature or may have some regulations or restrictions that may not be able to be achieved on the public cloud, put them in a hybrid cloud, and they can put those specific applications on the private model, and then they can utilize the public cloud for the rest of their application.
Okay, we've got a question from Scott. Do you see consolidation in the industry? For example, I use Dropbox, however, Google offers the same services. Most tech equipment companies offer such services as cloud printing. It seems like there are not any industry standards. Do you see any convergence?
I do think that in today's environments, you constantly are seeing a lot of companies merge, especially when they offer similar type services, and you do have struggles in standards a lot of times, and it's difficult to write standards in this type of environment because this environment is evolving so quickly. By the time you get the standards written, they're really out of date and not meeting the demands as I think that person's view is right on the money there. So I would definitely see some consolidation.
Thank you. So back to Kim's question on the Western Digital, the personal cloud. She did write in, thank you, Kim. She writes that it is a 4 terabyte drive seen at Costco that offers access in a cloud-like setting, if that helps, Craig.
So yeah, unfortunately, I'm not familiar with that, so I'm not able to comment on it. So I apologize for that. I do see a question online though that says, does the cloud provide backup for the data it stores? And the answer to that question is it really depends. It depends on the provider and the agreement. A lot of times that data is really maybe just backed up in a single location. So if that single location does end up having a problem, then you've really lost that data. So you have to really look at that on an individual case basis. I know there's a lot of times in working with a provider, you need to go through that level of detail. You have to know where the data is stored. Is it being backed up? Is it being backed up at one location? Is it being backed up at multiple locations? Are there certain times of the day so that if these backups occur at the same time, then and what's the retention policy? Where is it? Is it eventually being stored off site as well? So that's a very individual case basis, and somebody who's looking at the cloud as a storage vehicle, especially for business, they really need to dig down and understand all the details that are associated with that, because there's nothing worse than losing some of the data that you thought was secure.
Okay, we've got a question from Melissa. Would you please elaborate on concerns folks have about security of having their personal information, i.e. photos, text messages, etc., stored in the cloud, the pros and cons of using this environment, and what we can do to protect our information?
So the first thing that you can do to kind of protect and know and understand is there every time you go to store information in a cloud type environment, there's usually terms and conditions. So one of the things that I would actually suggest is actually reading through those terms and conditions. So I think that's probably a good idea first. The second thing, and I got to go back just a little bit here, is understanding the type of information that's out there. Is it just pictures, or is it is it financial data? And then there are regulations, government regulations on specific types of data. If it's HIPAA data, then there are specific regulations that need to be followed on that type of information. So making sure that the provider is providing the level of protection appropriate for the type of data that you're storing. So the next question I see up here is I'm wondering how Craig sees cloud integrating with the Internet of Things. So that's kind of an interesting question because I attended a meeting a couple of months back, and one of the topics was the Internet of Things, and there was a huge number of people that attended that, and there was a security conference. And the reason that you know, the Internet of Things now, everything being connected, so that's what we're talking about now is the Internet of Things where, you know, almost everything has got an IP address. You know, your printer is an IP address, and, you know, your washer and dryer, your refrigerator, and you know, a lot of times these specific devices are going into a cloud service that is many times by the manufacturer. But one of the things that also brings up, though, is a security concern, because if somebody can hack into that device, then it brings up, you know, capabilities that are related to, you know, basically getting into another network. So as we see the cloud computing, I think you'll start to have, it's very, very possible that you'll start to have almost kind of a consolidation, perhaps, you know, on a lot of these Internet of Things going into a specific platform that has common needs that can be taken advantage of.
Thank you, Craig. John wants to know if there are independent ratings available that evaluate the security of these various providers.
So I am not aware of that. There's a lot of security organizations that can help in that, but I'm not aware of any specific, you know, general organizations. But there's actually a very large growing trend in terms of security firms. I heard the number of security firms that in the U.S. over the last 18 months has jumped about 100 a month. So just in every month, 100 new security firms are popping up because security is such a hot topic. But I'm not aware of a specific one that rates that. One of the things that you do need to do, though, is you know, the contracts are very detailed on these services, so ensuring that you know, those contracts are going to meet the specific business needs that you have of that data and the specific security concerns that you have.
Along the lines of security in the cloud, Tim has submitted a question asking about Dropbox. She learned at a conference on security for real estate that Dropbox is having some serious issues. Could you comment on that from what you are seeing out there?
So I wouldn't want to necessarily comment specifically on Dropbox, but just say that, you know, anytime that you are putting, you know, I'm going to say whether it's considered business critical or confidential or even consumer data out there into a public cloud, you got to really think about the what ifs. And you got to know what the security, you know, what you're signing off on that documentation and what the potential risks are. So that is something to really seriously consider as we look at business and personal information. One of the statistics or one of the comments that I heard from a security professional is a lot of times that we are our own worst enemy, in that a lot of times we as consumers just put too much information out there, and I'm not necessarily saying on a Dropbox, but even Facebook. I mean, not necessarily a good idea to be posting all the pictures from vacation on Facebook while you're on vacation, basically having it be an advertisement that my house is vacant for the next week, so come on and get what you like.
We all are nodding our heads to that one. A question from Peter. As more data is stored virtually, what is your advice about archiving? And what happens in the future with this data? Does it ever eventually get deleted if it's inactive? And what about provisions to transfer to a quote-unquote beneficiary? Thoughts around that, Craig?
So that's a two really important points. Is that a lot of times you do need to some sites specifically only hold data for a certain amount of time, and then you go back to get it later only to realize that it's gone. And so understanding what the time frames are that the data is held is truly something that you need to look at. And then when we do store something out there, as I go back to one of the other slides that I had on recovery, there's two things to think about in terms of getting the data that you want to the cloud, and once you get the data to the cloud, then how do I get it back, and am I going to get it back in the format that I want? So those are two very, very good questions or concerns, and two things that we really do need to look at when we're looking at releasing this data to the cloud and wanting to know, okay, how do I get it back? Because every provider has got some different methods to get it back, and they've got different, some providers will keep your data there forever, and others will have a very limited period of time, and it's on page 63 of the contract, and you go to look for your data and it's no longer there.
Thank you. We've got a question from, can you scroll back up? Nope, yes, from William. Is there a way to mitigate noisy neighbors? Does the cloud provider have a responsibility to ensure minimum requirements?
So I've seen different cloud platforms that respond to I'm going to say test and utilization in different ways. So there's some independent third parties that will rate cloud providers on performance, and I think sometimes that's probably a pretty reasonable way to check on the noisy neighbor syndrome, because what that does is it provides you a third party a view, and it's a realistic performance measure. So I would look to some of those third-party tests of cloud websites to find out those that do a good job in minimizing the noisy neighbor.
All righty, that is all the questions we have seen come through, Craig. So I thank you for answering all of those. If there are additional questions, any of you out there are free to email them to ritalum@rit.edu or tweet them to @RIT_alumni with the hashtag #MeRITWebinars, and we will get your questions over to Craig and get some answers right back at you. As a reminder, all participants will receive an email from us in the next few days with a link to today's recording. Thank you so much to Craig for being our speaker today, and thank you to all of you for joining us. Again, apologies for the very late start. Keep an eye out for an email about our next webinar, which is on July 19th, when alumna Emily J. Hart returns with her next webinar presentation, Stepping into Your Power, the Strength of Choice. Thank you again for joining us.